Now, the phrase New Europe, Old Europe was first invoked in part because of the Iraq War, when our administration did not get the support from France and Germany for the invasion of Iraq. And our administration branded Europe into the dichotomy of New Europe and Old Europe. New Europe is what? New Europe are those countries that support us. Old Europe, those who live in the pre-9/11, right? Right. So, what I want to suggest is that there's also another kind of dynamic in the transformation of Europe. First, in New Europe, in terms of fantastic changes in the past 50, 60 years as a result of the evolution of the European Union, the integration of Europe, one, in a common market, economic development, making Europeans much better off the past 50 years than in previous points. Also part of the dynamics of of the New Europe, is that the New Europe is a Europe without war against itself. It is something which, for you who are under 50 or so, it's a peaceful place. I mean, you don't find countries fighting each other. But President Flem mentioned that I did spend my early childhood in France, and although I didn't know it then that I was an American, because I went there when it was too soon for me to know that I was American. So I learned history of the world through franchise, and through franchise, in the first grade, the second grade, the third grade, you knew that whatever was on the other side of the Rhine was dangerous. 1870, invasion of France from Germany. 1880s, it's Nietzsche who corrupts the youth everywhere. 1914, I mean, everything on the other side of the Rhine was always dangerous. But since then, one of the great aspects of the evolution of the New Europe is certainly the amicable relationship between France and Germany. No wars in Europe, economic development. Also, as part of the New Europe, and this will be important for my story, is the, especially since 1970, although there's a long-term growth to it, the secularization process. Europe becoming very, very, very secular, so that you go to churches and you see bingo parlors or the equivalent or something like that. You see very, very few people going, especially in the northern countries, the Netherlands, in France. I mean, but what you have instead are new secular humanitarian values, replacing the more traditional values. In terms of cohabitation, whatever you want to do. This is a very important aspect of the transformation of Europe, the New Europe, right? So that takes care of a lot of things up here. The New European identity is, to me, something very interesting that young people under 35 or so, are developing, I think, a hybrid, in a sense, a hybrid identity. Instead of being German, Belgian, French, being German in Europe, Belgian in Europe. That's what I mean by hybrid. There's a sense of not only having the national, and maybe also a regional belonging, but also a belonging in Europe. Which I think is an interesting kind of a new identity emerging, which would be studied. New European, right? Second aspect of the transformation of Europe is there's a new presence. There's a new presence in Europe, which presence is a Muslim presence. Now, in a sense, there's been a Muslim presence in Europe for a long time. But in terms of the significant numbers, the economic success of Europe, the economic development of Europe, has also meant a labor shortage for the economic development and reconstruction of post-war Europe. A labor shortage. The first component of the labor supply came from Southern Europe, from Yugoslavia, from Spain, and so on and so forth, in the 50s, early 60s. But then after that, as for a variety of reasons, Southern Europe started gradually to improve economically. The labor supply had to come from outside for places like Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. And in a sense, it came from the periphery of Europe. The periphery of Europe is, on one hand, from Turkey, as well as from the southern Mediterranean area, right? So that you had, starting in the late 70s and 80s, you had a fairly large wave of immigration that came to Europe. In the late 80s and 1990s, in part through political upheavals and military upheavals in the Middle East, you had waves coming in the 1990s into Europe as political refugees, exiles, refugees. So let's see, what do I do? I put down here again. That works. Okay. Now, as part of my major points of discussion, is that in the New Europe, you now have a strong presence of Muslim immigrants who were not in their country of origin necessarily religious in terms of identity, but much more Pakistani, Iraqis, so on and so forth. They come, and according to my interpretation, and of course here, Bruce Mayhew may not like an interpretation, but I think I will interpret, coming into Europe, the immigrants, especially in the second generation, have developed a Muslim identity, which is in some ways an identity that is different from the ethnic identity of being Pakistani and so on and so forth. They've developed a new identity which structurally is parallel to Europeans developing a new identity of not just being, Belgian, but being Belgian and so forth. It's an interesting kind of parallel.